The first time I realized my mother didn't love me the way a mother should, I was standing barefoot on cold tile, holding a burnt piece of toast in trembling hands. She turned from the stove, looked me dead in the eyes, and said with a smirk, "You'll never achieve anything. Look at your brother. He's the smart one." Then she laughed. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious way. Just enough to let me know I didn't matter. She was standing in the kitchen, backlit by the yellow glow of our old pendant light, stirring a pot of rice with one hand and holding a cigarette with the other. Her laugh wasn't sharp. It was brittle, like broken glass swept into a dustpan. I was 12. My brother was 14. And he was already, in her words, a genius. Top of his class, charming, a whiz with computers. She called him her little man, called me the other one. At dinner, she'd quiz him like a game show host. What's the capital of Morocco? How many elements on the periodic table? Spell onomatopoeia. She'd beam with pride when he got it right. And he always did. Then her eyes would land on me. And what did you do today? Doodle in your little sketchbook again? My father would sit beside her, his fork barely scraping his plate. His eyes would meet mine just long enough to say, "I'm sorry," but his mouth never said it. Not once. It was always the same script. My brother the star, me the shadow. By the time I hit high school, the comparisons were public. Family dinners with aunts and uncles, birthdays, graduations, they were all opportunities for my mother to chip away at whatever sliver of confidence I had managed to salvage. "She'll never be anything serious," she'd say, wine in hand, smile tight. "Not like her brother. He's going places." And I believed her. That's the part I can't forget. Not the insults themselves, but the quiet way I started to accept them. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped showing people my drawings. I even stopped singing in the car when a song I loved came on, afraid she'd mock the sound of my voice. I didn't hate my brother. How could I? He was nice in a detached, older sibling kind of way, but he never corrected her. Never said, "Hey, Mom, she's actually really smart," or, "You're being cruel." He stayed silent. And silence, I learned early, is its own kind of weapon. My father? He was a ghost with warm hands. He'd find me alone in my room and press a dollar bill into my hand with a smile. "Go get yourself something sweet," he'd say. "You're doing fine, baby girl." But he never told her to stop. Not once. Not even when she said, at Thanksgiving one year, in front of everyone, "She'll probably end up a waitress or some poor man's secretary. Let's hope she marries well." The table laughed. That was the moment something shifted in me. I remember it vividly. The turkey was dry, the cranberry sauce too sweet, and I was 13, stuck in a body that didn't feel like mine, with a voice that cracked when I spoke. But that night, I stopped crying about it. I didn't fight back. Not yet. But I made a promise to myself as I scraped leftovers into the trash and listened to the muffled sound of football from the living room. One day, she'll eat those words. I started spending more time at the public library, not because it was quiet, but because nobody there looked at me like I was a disappointment. I read books on everything: psychology, business, design, coding, even cooking. Anything that made me feel like I wasn't a waste of space. At home, it didn't matter. My mother called it playing pretend. She'd say, "All that reading won't get you anywhere if you can't even make a proper cup of coffee." Once, I made a flyer for a school event, spent hours on the layout, the fonts, the color palette. I was so proud of it, I left a copy on the kitchen counter. She used it to wipe up spilled milk. And yet, somehow, I kept going. That's the part I still don't understand. Not why she hated me so much, but why I didn't let it destroy me. Maybe it was the way my father's hand lingered on my shoulder when I passed him in the hallway. Maybe it was the quiet, good job he whispered the day I won a small local art contest. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she couldn't touch. Somewhere deep down, a voice started whispering, "They're wrong about you." It was soft at first, unsteady, but it was there. The voice got louder every time I read a new book cover to cover. Louder when I taught myself how to build a website, when I sold my first handmade candles on Etsy, when a teacher wrote insightful on my essay. I didn't show my mother any of it. Let her keep thinking I was a mess, because I wasn't planning to prove her wrong with words. I was planning to bury her judgment with results. But I was patient. Revenge, real revenge, doesn't start with shouting matches or door-slamming arguments. It starts in silence, in the space between her latest insult and my next quiet win. And the silence was almost over. When you're told you're worthless long enough, you start to believe it. But somewhere along the way, that belief began to fracture. Not all at once, but like hairline cracks in old glass. Subtle at first, then undeniable. It started the day I checked out a worn copy of The Lean Startup from the library, the kind with sticky notes left behind by someone else. Their handwriting was neat, deliberate. A stranger's thoughts inked beside every chapter like a conversation across time. One note in the margin read, "Don't wait to be chosen. Build something they can't ignore." I dog-eared the page. That book didn't save me, but it opened something I didn't know was locked. By then, I had learned to operate quietly. I'd gotten good at being invisible. Not just at home, but in class, on the bus, in the cafeteria. I was that girl in the corner, scribbling business ideas on napkins while other kids planned parties or complained about finals. But in my head, I wasn't small. In my head, I was building something. My mother would pass by my room and see the light on, shake her head, mutter, "Waste of electricity for someone who'll end up flipping burgers." I never responded. I just adjusted the lamp and kept reading. I devoured everything I could find on branding, leadership, revenue models. I didn't always understand the language, CAC, burn rate, vertical integration, but I kept digging. Every unfamiliar word became a new rabbit hole to disappear into. It was addictive. The world outside offered escape, but it was the world inside, the one I was slowly building in my head, that offered hope. My father caught me once, staying up past 2, sketching out ideas in a binder I kept hidden under my bed. He knocked softly and peeked in, wearing that same weary half-smile he always wore when he didn't want to wake the dragon downstairs. "You drawing again?" he asked. I nodded. "Looks complicated." "It's not," I lied. "Just a layout for a cafe." He stepped in, closed the door behind him. "Cafe, huh?" I hesitated, then opened the binder fully. It was more than a layout. It was a concept. A modular restaurant space with shifting seasonal menus, local ingredient sourcing, and a full digital loyalty program. At 16, I had no idea how I'd pay for any of it, but I knew what I wanted it to feel like the opposite of my house. Warm, honest, safe. He sat beside me on the edge of the bed and flipped through the pages, slowly, silently. Then he looked at me, eyes tired but proud. "You think you can build this?" "I know I can." He didn't say much after that, just nodded, gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze, and left. But he didn't tell her, and that was enough. By senior year of high school, my mother had resigned herself to pretending I didn't exist unless there was an audience. She bragged about my brother's SAT scores like they were lottery winnings. Me? I was still into that cafe nonsense. I didn't correct her, because she didn't know that while she was nursing wine at her sister's house, I was volunteering at pop-up markets downtown, learning how to price, upsell, and pitch. I was helping a local food truck owner on weekends, washing dishes, tracking inventory, even shadowing his food permit applications. He paid me in tacos and advice. Everyone thinks the food's what matters, he told me once, waving a spatula in the air. It's the math that kills you. Know your numbers, and you own your future. So I learned the numbers. I learned how profit margins lived and died by overhead. How to talk to city inspectors without sounding defensive, how to turn a negative Yelp review into an opportunity. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was mine. And every hour I worked, sweaty, broke, and unnoticed, was a brick in the foundation I was quietly building. Every night I came home smelling like grease and failure, I'd lock my door, pull out my laptop, and tweak another pitch deck. Eventually, my sketches turned into spreadsheets. Spreadsheets turned into full-fledged business models. I started running small focus groups online, just a few strangers I met through a startup subreddit. People who didn't know me, didn't pity me, and didn't compare me to anyone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't competing. I was building. And yet, I said nothing at home. Let them believe I was drifting. It was easier that way. My father sometimes left small printouts for me, articles clipped from the business section, scribbled with notes like interesting layout for small kitchens or new funding for women-led ventures. He never asked questions, never demanded updates. He just supported, quietly, as always. One night, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen, my mother's voice, sharp and loud. She's wasting her time. At this rate, she'll be 30 and still living here. And his voice, soft, almost apologetic. She's learning. You'd be surprised how much she knows. I'd be surprised if she didn't screw it up like everything else. That night, I opened a fresh document. I titled it, Business Plan, Proof of Life. Not for investors, not for my father, not even for her. For me. It took months to finish. I rewrote it 10 times. I watched tutorials on investor psychology, designed logos, researched supply chains, and built mock financials down to the last cent. I pitched it in front of the mirror, in the shower, in my dreams. And by the time it was done, something inside me had changed. I wasn't hoping for success anymore. I was expecting it. Because ambition, real ambition, the kind that comes from being told you're worthless, isn't loud. It's not flashy. It's quiet, relentless. It grows in the dark. And mine had taken root. I was 25 when I walked into my first pitch meeting. My palms were sweating so badly I had to wipe them on the inside lining of my blazer before I shook anyone's hand. The conference room was all glass and steel, with one of those faux zen water walls humming quietly in the background, like a reminder to stay calm. I wasn't calm. I was electrified. There were 3 of them across the table. 2 men in fitted suits, who looked like they'd stepped out of a tech conference in San Francisco, and a woman with sharp red lipstick and a tablet she didn't look up from. I was the youngest in the room, the poorest, the least connected. But I had a pitch deck, a prototype, and a voice that refused to tremble even as my knees locked under the table. My name is Alina, I began. I'm not from money. I'm not from a legacy. But I have something better, an idea that fixes a broken piece of how people experience food in this city. I introduced them to Calix, my modular, seasonally adaptive restaurant model that could operate both as a high-end dine-in experience and a casual pop-up. Local chefs, rotating menus, farm-to-table partnerships, a digital app that allowed customers to follow ingredient sourcing in real time, even interact with the kitchen during prep windows. Transparency, quality, community. I watched them nod, mostly out of politeness. Red lipstick woman never blinked. One of the men checked his phone halfway through, but I kept going. Millennials and Gen Z are not loyal to brands, I said. clicking to the market data slide. They're loyal to values, sustainability, local economy, experience. This isn't a restaurant, it's a movement. When I finished, there was silence. Not stunned silence. Not respectful silence. The silence of people waiting for you to thank them for their time and leave. Red Lipstick finally spoke, her voice crisp. You want us to give you money to open a rotating restaurant in a city that's saturated with them already? No, I said. I want you to invest in a scalable, digitally driven hospitality experience that's primed to expand into regional markets within 3 years. She raised an eyebrow. And you have restaurant experience? I've run kitchens. I've consulted for 3 trucks and 2 cafes in the last 2 years. I know what fails. More importantly, I know why. The man on the right sighed audibly. Look, your passion's obvious. But this is a lifestyle brand at best, and you're asking for seed money, like it's Series A. Start smaller, the other one chimed in. A booth at a farmer's market. Get your hands dirty. I've been dirty my whole life, I said before I could stop myself. Red Lipstick looked up at that, briefly, then down again. I didn't get the funding. I got a thank you and a polite dismissal. I walked out smiling, though, not because it went well, but because I'd done it. I'd sat across from people who didn't believe in me and refused to flinch, and now I knew what to fix. I went home, stripped off my blazer, and sat on the floor with a beer and my laptop, rewriting the entire deck from scratch. I pitched again, 2 months later, to a local incubator that hosted monthly startup nights. This time, I wore jeans and boots. No script, just story. I grew up being told I was nothing, I told the room. But that's the wrong word. I wasn't nothing. I was invisible. And invisibility teaches you how to see what others miss. I see what's broken in the hospitality space, and I've built something to fix it. There were 10 people in the room. 5 nodded. 3 clapped when I was done. 1 asked to meet for coffee. That one changed everything. Her name was Janelle, mid-30s, angel investor, former marketing director for a now global organic juice chain. She wore a hoodie and sneakers and didn't give a shit about formality. I like it, she said, sipping an oat milk latte. But your concept's too big for your budget. If I back you, I want you to prove it works in a micro model first. You mean a test kitchen? No, I mean a pop-up. 6-month lease. Downtown. You bring the experience. I'll bring the soft capital. 30% equity. That number hit hard. You don't even know if I can run a kitchen. I don't need to. I saw you pitch. You've already survived something most founders never have. Being underestimated. That's your edge. Use it. I went home and stared at the contract she emailed me that night. I didn't sign it right away. I read every line, then sent it to a friend who'd studied business law. Then I spent 3 days doing nothing but running numbers on what 30% would really mean if I scaled. When I signed, I knew what I was giving up and what I was claiming in return. The day I filed the LLC paperwork, I cried. Not because it was emotional, because it was real. For the first time in my life, I was building something with backing behind me. Not a dream, a business. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my brother. I didn't even tell my father. Not yet. I just worked. I built my menu, hired 2 cooks, drafted interior design layouts with a friend from art school. We painted the walls ourselves. I installed half the lighting. We scoured restaurant auctions for used furniture. Every dollar mattered. Every hour was sacred. Janelle checked in weekly, not to micromanage, but to challenge. What's your supply chain plan for winter produce? How are you building customer retention without loyalty cards? What's your conversion funnel on walk-ins to app downloads? She didn't coddle me. She respected me. That was rarer than funding. Opening night came fast. Too fast. I was terrified. The sign outside wasn't even backlit properly. But people came. Friends, strangers, curious passers-by drawn in by the smell of rosemary lamb and the soft glow from mismatched table lamps. By the end of the night, we'd sold out of 3 menu items. A local blogger posted a glowing review 2 days later. Then another. We weren't just afloat. We were sailing. And still, I told no one in my family. Let them think I was drifting. Because when the time came to reveal the truth, it wouldn't be whispered. It would echo. It started with an envelope. Plain, unmarked, slid under the door of my apartment like a secret. Inside was a folded check for $1,000 and a single note, written in that small, looping handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Don't tell your mother. I believe in you. Dad. I just stared at it. My throat tightened. Not from the money, not even from the message, from the fact that he had called it a secret. I hadn't told either of them about the pop-up. In my mind, the less my mother knew, the better. I wasn't ready for the ridicule, the dismissive wave of her hand. But I had told my dad that I was doing a little freelance stuff in food, a phrase vague enough to keep questions at bay. He must have done his own digging. Maybe he asked around. Maybe he'd driven by the storefront and recognized the logo from the sketches I used to leave lying around the house as a teenager. I'll never know exactly when he figured it out. But that envelope was his way of stepping in. Quietly, carefully, like always. I called him that night, tried to keep it casual. Hey, I said. Hey yourself, he answered, voice warm, like it always was when Mom wasn't in the room. So, I got your envelope. Silence. Then, she didn't see it, right? No, of course not. Good. Another pause. Thank you, I said quietly. I mean it. I wasn't going to ask. I know, he said. That's why I sent it. And that was that. No lecture, no guilt trip. Just a man who knew exactly how heavy the world felt on my shoulders, and who, in his own way, had decided to carry a corner of it with me. That check didn't solve everything, but it covered the cost of our branded takeout boxes and menus, which meant I didn't have to settle for the cheap, generic ones. It meant customers took pictures of their food and tagged us on social media. It meant people remembered us. That $1,000 turned into $4,200 in sales over the next 3 weeks. I wrote it down. I kept a ledger just for his contributions, how each dollar helped me move one more square forward on the board. I didn't know why I did that at the time. Maybe I was preparing to pay him back. Maybe I just needed to believe that someone's belief in me had numbers behind it. A few weeks later, another envelope arrived. This time, it was $600. Tucked inside was a sticky note with only one word: lighting. I laughed. He had noticed the bad fixture over the counter. That flickering one that made the space look like a basement horror movie scene on slow nights. I replaced it the next day with a soft, warm pendant light that made the front windows glow like embers. Customers started lingering longer. A few even asked if they could host small parties or book the place for date nights. That sticky note lived on my fridge for months. My father never asked for updates. He didn't quiz me about profits or strategy. He just showed up sometimes, quiet as a ghost, always around closing. He'd order the same thing each time, the roasted squash flatbread with fennel and goat cheese. He'd sit at the farthest table near the window and eat slowly, napkin folded on his lap like it was a 5-star dinner. We never talked much during those visits. Once, though, I brought over his plate myself. He looked up at me, eyes bright under tired lids, and said, "You really built this?" I did. He nodded, eyes scanning the room. "It's beautiful." I think he meant more than the decor. After that night, the envelopes came more often. Sometimes cash. Sometimes a note scribbled on the back of a grocery list. Once, hilariously, he gave me a bag of receipts from Home Depot with a note that said, "If you need shelves, these are good brackets." They weren't always helpful in a literal sense, but they were his way of saying, "I see you." And it made me want to succeed even more. It wasn't just about proving my mother wrong anymore. It was about proving my father right. And that was a different kind of fire. One night, around month 5, we had our first major disaster. A vendor shipment didn't arrive, our walk-in fridge shorted out, and I had to throw away nearly $800 worth of product. I was in the back, on the floor, trying not to cry while my line cook, Mario, was sweeping broken glass from a dropped container of pickled onions. That was when my dad texted me. He never texted. He barely used his phone. But there it was. A simple message. You're allowed to have bad days. Don't let them make you small. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. Then I got up, threw on an apron, and salvaged what I could. That night, we served a simplified 3-item menu. People didn't complain. In fact, several guests complimented how curated it felt. One even said the short menu made the food feel more intentional. I called my dad the next day and told him that. "Intentional, huh?" he said with a chuckle. "I guess broken fridges are good for something." "You know," I said, "you're really good at this quiet support thing." "I've had practice." I knew what he meant. He'd been surviving in that house for decades. I wasn't the only one who had learned to shrink themselves around her moods. He just did it with less fire, more endurance. But in those quiet envelopes, in the small ways he backed me, he showed me his kind of strength. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. But it held. And slowly, it started to build a bridge between us. Not made of forgiveness exactly, but of mutual recognition. We were both survivors of the same storm, just in different corners of the house. And now, we were building something together, brick by brick, even if she never knew. Especially because she never knew. Opening a restaurant isn't romantic. It's war. And I was in the trenches, cutting invoices at 2 a.m., scrubbing grease off the tile floors with blistered hands, hauling crates of produce through the alley at dawn while trying not to wake the neighbors. The city smelled like piss and potential, depending on which block you were on. Our pop-up was only meant to last 6 months. That was the deal with Janelle. Test the concept, build the brand, prove viability. But by month 4, we were operating like a full-time restaurant. Not because we were ready, but because we had no choice. Word had spread. People wanted to book tables weeks in advance. We started getting catering inquiries. A local food magazine called us the city's best-kept secret. I wanted to laugh. Nothing about what we were doing felt secret to me. It was blood, sweat, spreadsheets, and all of it was held together with string and hope. One Friday night, the power went out during dinner service. Just the kitchen, not the dining room. My head chef panicked. My line cook threw his gloves down. We had 30 people seated and no oven, no grill, no stove. I stepped into the walk-in fridge and stood there in the cold, thinking. I could cancel the night, refund the tickets, apologize, or I could pivot. I emerged with a plan, a raw tasting menu. Cold dishes only, cheese flights, seasonal fruits with hand-whipped ricotta, heirloom tomato tartare, chilled soups. I gave each plate a name, dressed it in edible flowers, and told the staff to explain the sudden change as a chef's experimental event. People loved it. One guest called it revolutionary. Another offered to write a review on their food blog. A guy proposed to his girlfriend over a smoked salmon terrine that we had plated on a whim. What felt like a catastrophe became a celebration. That night, I sat on the floor in the back office, my apron stiff with sweat, staring at the wall like it was alive. And I whispered to myself, "You're not faking it anymore." But even with the small wins, there were nights I wanted to burn it all down. Staff turnover hit us like a plague. We lost 2 servers in 1 week, one to burnout, the other to a better-paying brunch spot. I stepped in, refilling water, wiping tables, smiling until my jaw ached. I bussed plates while planning payroll in my head. I filed taxes on the bathroom floor during a slow Monday shift, laptop balanced on my knees. And every time I thought I couldn't stretch myself thinner, the universe pulled harder. Janelle stayed close. She wasn't the check-in every day kind of investor, but she kept me honest. Once, I confessed I was thinking of taking a side gig doing consulting again just to ease cash flow. She raised an eyebrow over her wine and said, "You want to work for someone else again just to keep your dream on life support?" "No," I said. "I want to breathe." "Then raise prices," she snapped. "You're selling a luxury experience at survival rates. Value yourself like your customers already do." It was terrifying, but I did it, and she was right. The revenue bump carried us through a rough quarter. I learned that surviving meant recalibrating constantly. There was no map, no mentor whispering wisdom in my ear, just instinct and grit. And my father. He never stopped showing up. Once, I found him standing outside the restaurant in the rain, holding a new mop and bucket like it was a bouquet. He'd overheard me complaining during one of our calls that ours smelled like mildew. "You said you needed a new one," he shrugged, as if that justified the 2-hour bus ride. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I wanted to." I hugged him, my chin resting on his shoulder. He smelled like aftershave and wet wool, the kind of smell that reminded me I wasn't alone. That night, I walked him through the kitchen, introduced him to the staff. He didn't say much, just shook hands and nodded. But when he sat down at his usual table, the cooks whispered, "That's her dad?" Like I was suddenly made of more than just effort. Like my roots made me real. Then came our first food critic. I didn't know she was there until halfway through her meal. A reservation under a fake name. Quiet. Observant. She ordered 5 dishes and took notes after every bite. She didn't smile, didn't ask for substitutions. Just observed. I didn't sleep that night. The review came out 4 days later. It opened with, "In a city littered with overhyped, overpriced dining concepts chasing clout instead of craft, Calix is a revelation. It doesn't try to impress. It simply delivers. It feels like someone built it with their bare hands and heart bleeding onto every plate." I cried in the walk-in. Ugly cried. Shoulder-heaving, breathless, snot-in-your-apron cried. That review brought in a flood of new customers. We had to close online reservations for 3 days just to keep up. We added 2 more prep cooks, a host, and another dishwasher. I gave Mario a raise. I bought my line cook her first set of pro knives. The pop-up was thriving, but the clock was ticking. The 6-month lease was about to end. Janelle called me in for lunch. "You've got options now," she said. "You want to go permanent? Can we afford it?" "Barely, but barely is enough." I said yes. We signed a 3-year lease on a slightly bigger space 3 blocks over. It was ugly, all raw drywall and cracked tile, but the bones were solid. I called my father first. "Dad," I said, voice shaking, "I'm opening a real one." "You already did." "No, I mean permanent." He went quiet. Then, "I'm proud of you." That was the first time he ever said it out loud. I hung up and stood in the middle of that broken shell of a space, watching dust float in the sunlight, and realized I had built something out of nothing. No degree, no partners, no family name, just scars, spreadsheets, and a quiet man who slipped envelopes under doors when no one was looking. Against all odds, I was winning. And I wasn't done yet. By the time I opened the permanent location, I had learned to live a double life. To most of the city, I was an up-and-coming restaurateur, A woman who had built something sleek, sustainable, and quietly disruptive. A woman whose name started showing up in local business panels and 40 under 40 lists. The kind who got LinkedIn messages from strangers saying, "I've been following your journey. It's inspiring." But at home, in the world I'd been born into, I was still nobody. My mother still thought I worked in hospitality, a word she always pronounced like it belonged in air quotes. "She serves tables," I overheard her say once at a family gathering, glass of rosé in hand. She didn't go to college, so, it's what she could get. I was 27. I had 3 salaried employees. I had a lawyer, a CPA, and a waiting list that ran 3 weeks deep. And I still hadn't told her. Because success changes nothing when you're dealing with someone who needs you to fail. At first, I thought it was fear holding me back. But it wasn't that simple. It was strategy. I had learned that silence gave me power. She couldn't tear down what she didn't know existed. My father knew, of course. He had visited the new space during the renovation phase, helped patch up drywall and wire in the new espresso machine. Every time he came in, he brought something small: fresh rosemary from his garden, a stack of cloth napkins from a thrift store, a light bulb he found on sale. But we had an understanding. We didn't talk about it at home. "Your mother doesn't need to know everything," he'd say, with a tired smile that never quite reached his eyes. "She's happier that way." Is she? I wanted to ask. Or does she just feel safer when I'm small? I didn't push it. The double life became routine. Every morning I'd tie my apron, open the doors, and step into a world that recognized me. Every night I'd call my dad, or sometimes sit in the silence of my apartment, wondering if my mother ever asked where I really was. Spoiler, she didn't. To her, I was still the shadow at the table, the daughter who never quite figured it out. I kept waiting for the moment she'd stumble across an article or hear someone mention the restaurant by name, but she never read business magazines, and she definitely never visited downtown. Her universe was small, by design. It didn't have room for my success. One afternoon, I caught her calling my brother on speakerphone in the kitchen while I visited. She didn't know I was within earshot. "She's not like you," she told him. "You've always been focused. She's creative, but that doesn't pay the bills." He didn't correct her. Of course he didn't. I don't know what hurt more, her dismissal or his silence. After that, I stopped trying to show up to birthdays or holidays, not out of anger, out of clarity. It's exhausting to keep pretending you haven't grown just to make others comfortable, but my father kept coming. Every other Sunday, like clockwork, he'd appear at the restaurant. He never stayed long, just a quick meal, a few quiet compliments, and a smile that made my chest ache. "I tell your mother you're busy with catering jobs," he said once, stirring sugar into his coffee. "She thinks you're making good side money." I laughed. "She thinks I'm a caterer?" "She thinks you're too disorganized to run a full business." Jesus. He smiled gently. "Let her think it. You don't need her permission." He was right. Still, there were moments the divide stung deeper than I wanted to admit. One of those moments came during a radio interview I did with a local station. The host, this bright-eyed entrepreneur type, leaned across the mic and asked, "What's your family think about all this? They must be so proud." I smiled. "They're supportive in their own way." She laughed, not knowing what I meant. But I did. Support looks different when you've spent your life dodging emotional landmines. For me, it looked like hidden checks and unspoken visits. It looked like one parent offering quiet encouragement and the other pretending you're a waitress. Still, I built. Month after month, the restaurant grew. We expanded hours, added a wine program, landed our first full-feature piece in a national publication. Our social media exploded. We were booked out 6 weeks in advance, and my mother still referred to me as our little free spirit. The hypocrisy would have been comical if it hadn't been so familiar. One day, while scanning through her Facebook posts, don't ask why, I'm not proud, I found a photo of her with my brother at a conference he'd spoken at. She'd captioned it, "Proud mama of this brilliant mind, the success stories of our family." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the app, got up, and rewrote the copy on our restaurant's new homepage. Because while she was still holding dinner parties for my brother's old law school friends, I was quietly becoming a pillar of my city's food scene. I wasn't asking for applause. I was building a legacy. One plate, one customer, one long, silent Sunday at a time. And deep down, I knew something she didn't. The best revenge is living a life so full, it leaves no room for resentment. My father was turning 65, a milestone. One of those ages where people start asking you if you've thought about retirement or if your back hurts when you sit too long. He didn't care for attention, but my mother made it her mission to throw a dinner he couldn't forget. And she meant that in the "look what I arranged for you" darling kind of way, not the "I love you deeply and want to celebrate your life" kind of way. She called me 2 weeks out, her voice clipped and rehearsed. "We're doing something nice this year, a real place, not one of your food trucks or hole-in-the-wall cafes." I was in my office, elbow deep in invoices when she said it. "Sure," I said, biting the inside of my cheek. "Sounds great." She paused like she was waiting for me to ask where. I didn't. "It's downtown," she finally offered, her tone carrying that usual edge. "Very exclusive. I heard it's impossible to get a reservation, but I called in a favor." I almost laughed. Of course she did. "I'll be there," I said. "What time?" "7 sharp. Don't be late, Alina. And please dress appropriately this time. You're not bussing tables tonight." She hung up before I could answer. I sat there for a moment, phone in my hand, the edges of reality folding in on themselves like a cruel joke. Because I knew the restaurant. She didn't know it, but the prestigious place she had heard about was mine. Calyx. I checked the reservation system. Sure enough, there it was. The hostess had taken the call, not recognizing the last name. My mother hadn't mentioned she was booking a table for her husband's birthday, just asked for something special. My team, always professional, slotted her into our best table. The irony? She'd called me pretentious for using rosemary foam in a dish once. Now she was bragging about eating at a place that served smoked beet tartare. I didn't tell anyone, not even my father. I wanted the moment to unfold naturally, if such a thing could even exist in a room soaked in that much bitterness and history. The day of the dinner, I arrived 5 minutes early. My team already knew. I had quietly pulled my manager aside the day before and said, "There's a private party at 7. That's my family. Treat them like royalty." He raised an eyebrow. "The mom?" "Yep." He didn't ask questions, just nodded. I dressed simply. A tailored black dress, heels I could barely stand in, and hair pulled back in a way that screamed effortless elegance, though it took 3 tries and 2 YouTube tutorials to get right. I waited at the bar, sipping soda water with lime. Not to impress anyone, just to stay sober. At 6:59, they walked in. My mother entered first, like she owned the place, clutching a gold clutch, wrapped in a shawl she probably bought just for the occasion. My father followed behind her, eyes scanning the room, soft lines of a smile forming the second he spotted me. But he didn't say anything. He knew better. My mother saw me and frowned. "You're early." "I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." She huffed. "At least you're dressed properly." Before I could respond, the maitre d' appeared beside her, calm and professional. "Good evening, Mrs. Varn. Welcome back to Calyx. It's an honor to have you tonight." She blinked. Back? Yes, of course, he said, smiling. We've arranged your table, the chef's table, actually, reserved for our special guests. Right this way. I watched her confusion bloom, delicate at first, then harden as she walked behind him, trying to make sense of his words. My father caught my eye, just briefly, and I gave him the smallest nod. The dining room was full, softly lit, humming with the kind of quiet luxury that makes people lower their voices and raise their expectations. Our table sat under a custom chandelier, hand-blown glass in soft amber tones, the kind of detail most diners appreciated without ever fully noticing. My mother sat down, trying to regain control of the moment. It's beautiful, she said, running a hand over the linen. I knew it would be. The staff treated them like royalty. Custom menus printed with my father's name. A complimentary amuse-bouche, the sommelier offering pairings with our compliments. She preened under the attention. My father smiled politely, but his eyes kept flicking to me, brows lifting like he was piecing something together. The moment that undid her came halfway through the main course. The manager approached the table with 2 flutes of champagne. These are from the owner, he said, placing them down gently. My mother straightened. Oh, how lovely. Do you know them personally? He smiled. Intimately. And then he turned, locking eyes with me across the room. She followed his gaze. I raised my glass. Her face changed. Not dramatically, not instantly, but the recognition moved through her like a wave she couldn't stop. I watched her eyes widen, her mouth press into a flat line, the corners twitch as she tried to compose herself. My father just leaned back and exhaled. He knew. He had always known. But now, the mask was gone. The dinner? My stage. And she was sitting dead center. It didn't happen all at once. You'd think the moment someone realizes the person they've belittled, dismissed, and tried to erase is actually the one responsible for the most elegant meal of their life, it would explode like a firework. A scene. A gasp. A dropped fork. But that's not how it works when you've trained your entire life to maintain control. My mother didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak. Not at first. She just stared. From across the restaurant, I watched the air leave her body in a quiet, invisible exhale. Her eyes flicked from the manager, to the chandelier above, to the fine-stitched linen under her hand, as if she were seeing everything for the first time, but through a different lens. A lens where she was no longer the one sitting at the top of the table, but a guest in someone else's domain. My domain. My father turned to her, brows lifted, voice gentle. You didn't know? That cracked something. She started, her voice brittle. You never said she owned this place. She never told you, he corrected. Not the same thing. My father didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't need to. He knew the real victory wasn't in rubbing her nose in it, but in watching her squirm under the weight of her own assumptions. I stood, straightened my dress, and made my way across the dining room. The floor went quiet in that particular way, only a high-end restaurant can. A hush that starts at one table and ripples outward like a dropped stone in water. A few guests turned their heads. One woman whispered to her date. The staff pretended not to look. My heels clicked softly against the stone as I reached the table. I smiled, calm and measured. Happy birthday, Dad. He stood, pulled me into a hug. Not a formal one, not staged. Real. He whispered into my ear, I'm so proud of you. I held back the sting behind my eyes. Then I turned to her. She hadn't moved. Her fork hovered mid-air, a bite of halibut forgotten. You picked a good spot tonight, I said. Not everyone makes it onto the chef's table, but I figured for Dad, we'd make an exception. She blinked. This is your restaurant? I tilted my head. Has been for a while now. A flush crept up her neck. Not embarrassment. Not yet. But confusion. Something deeper. Like she was trying to rewrite the last 2 years in real time, forcing the pieces to fit into a story she could still control. You never said anything. I never had to. The silence between us was heavier than anything on the menu. My father chuckled lightly, breaking the tension. She's been building it while you were busy dismissing her. She turned sharply to him. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, he replied, folding his napkin. I'm just eating in a place my daughter built from nothing. She looked back at me, searching. Maybe for proof it was a joke. Maybe for a way to claw back some sense of superiority. What do you even know about running a business? That was the spark. I leaned in slightly, voice low but steady. I know how to hire staff, pay them fairly, retain them longer than most places in the city. I know how to forecast quarterly revenue, build supplier relationships, manage payroll, negotiate a lease, handle health inspectors, and still plate food that makes people cry. The flush reached her ears. I also know how to keep a full restaurant for 14 months straight, handle a kitchen fire without losing a single day of service, and double profits year over year. She pressed her lips together. Would you like to know what else I know? She didn't answer, but I kept going. I know how to survive being told I was nothing, every day. I know how to turn that kind of poison into drive. You taught me that, actually. She looked away. Good. My father looked up at me, something soft in his face. Why didn't you tell us sooner? He asked. Because I wanted the work to speak for itself. And honestly, because I didn't want her to ruin it. His smile held no malice, just understanding. Around us, the other guests had gone back to their meals, but the energy at our table had shifted. No longer hers, no longer dictated by her tight smiles or passive digs. This was my theater now, and she was merely seated in the front row. I could feel her shrinking, even as she tried to sit tall. There's a kind of pride that's built on illusion, and when the curtain drops, all that's left is posture. She cleared her throat. Well, it's nice, I suppose. Fancy. Maybe a bit too modern, but it's not about impressing you. I cut in gently. It never was. She blinked again, taken off script. This was for Dad. He's the only reason I got here in the first place. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the original sticky note he'd written, the one that had said simply, lighting. I had laminated it. I slid it across the table. He picked it up, hands shaking slightly, and laughed. You kept this? Of course I did. He folded it again, tucked it into his coat pocket like it was a diamond. My mother stared at it like it was in another language. The rest of the meal passed in a strange sort of quiet. Not hostile, just heavy with realization. My father ate every bite like it was sacred. She barely touched her plate. Before they left, I walked them to the door. Thank you, my father said again, gripping my hand like he never wanted to let go. You don't have to thank me. This is your win too. He looked back at her. She lingered awkwardly near the host stand, unsure of how to leave a room she no longer owned. And then I said it. Next time you want to dine here, Mom, just say so. You won't need a favor. She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked out into the night. And for the first time in my life, I watched her leave my space. Not as the woman who raised me, but as someone finally aware of how small her kingdom had become. I didn't plan on telling them everything that night, but truth has a way of bubbling up when the air finally clears. And after years of swallowing my voice just to keep the peace, I wasn't going to let silence write the ending. The birthday dinner was over, but I invited them back to the private lounge, a quiet corner off the main floor reserved for special guests or post-event debriefs. It was dimly lit, softly furnished, designed for intimacy. My mother hesitated in the doorway. Are we even allowed back here? I smiled. I make the rules. She sat stiffly, perching on the edge of the leather sofa like someone expecting to be told off. My father relaxed into the seat across from her, gently swirling the aged scotch I had poured for him. One of our best. I stood for a moment, then paced slowly in front of them, fingers brushing against the low table, gathering my words. You asked earlier why I never told you, I said, finally breaking the quiet. About the restaurant, about any of this. My mother sniffed, trying to save face. It's not that I care. You could have mentioned it. We're family. No, I said sharply. You're not family to this. Her mouth snapped shut. My father didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. I didn't tell you, I continued, because you spent my whole life convincing me I wasn't capable of doing anything worth celebrating. Every single step I took toward building this, every sleepless night, every risk, I took without your blessing. And you made sure I knew I didn't have it. That's not fair, she said quickly. You told me I'd never amount to anything. I was trying to push you. I laughed, sharp and humorless. No, you were trying to break me before the world had the chance. You thought if you tore me down early, I wouldn't be disappointed later. But what you actually did, what you never understood, was give me a fire so hot it burned through every wall you built. She looked away, jaw tight. My father watched her, eyes unreadable. I built this place, I went on. Not in spite of you, but because I had to. Because you made me believe I had no safety net. And I didn't. Except him. I nodded toward my father. She turned back to him, narrowing her eyes. What does that mean? He looked at me. I gave him the nod. Do you remember all those errands I used to run? He said. The ones you thought took too long? She frowned. You always were slow. I wasn't running errands. I was wiring her startup money. Cash. In envelopes. Little by little. Helping her print menus. Helping her patch drywall. I was helping her build. My mother blinked. The kind of blink people do when reality lands like a slap. You lied to me. He shrugged. You never asked. She turned to me again, like she needed someone to lash out at. So what? You're successful now. Good for you. That doesn't give you the right to throw it in our faces. I'm not throwing it, I said. I'm owning it. Then I reached for the folder I had placed on the table. Thick, clean. Inside, paperwork, spreadsheets, letters. I handed it to my father. What's this? Proof of ownership, I said. Also, your retirement. He blinked. I started putting away 10% of profits into a separate account. In your name. You always worried you'd never be able to leave that job, that you'd be stuck with a pension and a broken back. Now you don't have to be. He stared at the folder like it was glowing. Jesus, Alina. You believed in me before there was anything to believe in. You showed up when no one else did. You gave when you had nothing to spare. I'll never forget that. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder, flipping through the pages in stunned silence. My mother leaned forward. And what about me? I turned to her, steady. You never showed up. You never asked. You never listened. I'm your mother. You were a wall, not a hand. And now, you get nothing. She flinched, then quickly masked it with a scoff. You're being dramatic. No, I said calmly. I'm being exact. The room went quiet again. She stood suddenly, smoothing her jacket. Well, this has been enlightening. Glad to hear it. She turned toward the exit without saying goodbye. My father lingered, still seated, still holding the folder like it was sacred. I don't know what to say, he murmured. You don't have to say anything. Just use it. Take that trip you've always talked about. Start a garden. Do nothing for once. He stood slowly, then pulled me into a long, quiet hug. Your mother may never say it, but I do. I'm proud of you. So damn proud. I know, I whispered. And I did. As they walked out, her first, back stiff with indignation, him behind her with shoulders lighter than I'd seen in years, I sat back down and looked around my lounge. No applause, no violins, just peace. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just fills a room like smoke, slow, undeniable, choking out the lies, one breath at a time. The night after the birthday dinner, I stayed late at the restaurant, long after the staff had clocked out and the tables were cleared. I walked the floor slowly, fingertips grazing the wood of the booths I'd picked out myself, pausing by the window where my father always used to sit. The silence wasn't empty. It was earned. This place wasn't just a restaurant. It was a monument. To survival. To growth. To becoming. But still, I didn't sleep well. Closure's funny like that. You spend years clawing toward it, thinking it's going to feel like fireworks, like finally winning the game. But when it lands, it's quiet. It's not a shout. It's a whisper. You're done. And that's when the grief creeps in. Not grief for what I lost. Grief for what I never had. There was no version of my mother who ever would have clapped for me. No future where she would have changed, apologized, grown. For years, I'd carried this unspoken hope that one day I'd do something so impressive it would break her, snap her out of that toxic lens and make her see me. But some people don't change. They calcify. And once I accepted that, the final blow didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. 2 weeks after the dinner, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Her penmanship as sharp and cold as I remembered. Alina, I don't agree with how you handled things. It was cruel, and frankly, unnecessary. But since you seem determined to stand on your own, I suppose we'll let that play out. Just know this. Blood is blood. And no matter how many restaurants you open, that doesn't change who you are. Your mother. I folded it neatly and tossed it in the recycling bin, because I do know who I am, and it has nothing to do with her. 3 months later, my father retired. For real this time. No side gigs, no just helping out hours at the hardware store. I helped him find a cozy cottage near the water, something he'd always talked about but never thought he'd actually have. He planted a garden, joined a fishing club, started painting. He sent me a photo one morning of a crooked little tomato plant he was especially proud of. The caption read, "Look what I grew." I laughed until I cried. We met for lunch every other Sunday like always. Except now it was different. He sat in the dining room like he owned a piece of it. Because in a way, he did. Every envelope, every whispered word of encouragement, every sticky note and bottle of cleaner. They were bricks in the foundation of my success. I never saw my mother again. She stopped attending family holidays, even the ones my brother tried to organize. I think part of her still hoped someone would tell her I'd failed, that the business had collapsed, that I came crawling back with an apron in one hand and shame in the other. But that day never came. Instead, my name appeared in a national culinary magazine as one of the next voices of hospitality. We expanded into a second location across the city. I hired 2 women who reminded me of younger versions of myself, overlooked, underestimated, but burning with potential. I poured myself into mentoring them, not to prove anything to my mother, but to break the cycle, because that's what real revenge is. Not just reclaiming your power, but using it to build what others tried to destroy. When people ask about my family now, I don't lie, but I don't dwell either. I just say, I come from a complicated past, but I built my own future. Sometimes I think back to that first check my father slid under my door. $1,000 and a note that said, "Don't tell your mother. I believe in you." That check didn't just pay for menus, it bought me freedom. And tonight, sitting at the bar of my own restaurant, watching the newest hire nervously take her first drink order, I feel something settle deep inside me. Not bitterness, not pride, just peace. Because the war is over. I didn't just survive my mother's judgment, I outgrew it. And when she looks back at her life, she'll have to live with the truth. She could have been part of it. She chose not to be. So no, she gets nothing. And I get everything.